Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Stefan Golas. I am a research technician at MIT, and I am a developer on the Pilot Robot open source framework that is a universal Python interface to liquid handling robots. I also develop a bunch of other applications in the Sculpting Evolution lab as part of my work as a research technician. Today, I'll be talking to you about the benefits of open source for hardware companies specifically, but keeping it pretty general, and then I'll kind of throw in some details that I think will be relevant to the listeners. Oh, next slide.
Yeah, good.
And so this is kind of what I just mentioned. So Pilot Robot, it's a sort of universal layer of abstraction over what the functionality of a liquid handling robot is. So if anybody isn't familiar with a liquid handling robot, it's a Cartesian robot that can aspirate and dispense precise volumes of liquid. So if you can define that layer of abstraction, then you can create drivers through our program to different individual robots. So we've created drivers for Hamilton robots, T-Can robots, and Opentrons, and we could hit as many as basically fulfill that definition of aspirating and dispensing precise volumes of liquid. The first project that sort of preceded Pilot Robot was PyHamilton. This is just a Python interface to Hamilton robots. And then I also host labautomation.io, which is the largest lab automation forum in the world. It's super active, up to 20 posts a day. People get a lot of information shared. I've found it incredibly useful just myself for being able to ask questions and get feedback from other automation engineers and a bunch of other companies. Next slide, please. So I heard some mentions of open source earlier. It's super valuable to building software. You basically can't build good software without open source at some point. And a lot of these open source projects are actually sponsored or directly developed by really big tech companies. And I think there's some misunderstanding or confusion about why big tech companies would invest so much into open source. It's not exactly an obvious thing, I think, in some cases. So some people maybe would think it's good publicity, good marketing, it's just a fun thing to work on. I don't think that's really the main reason. And so if you want to go to the next slide. One common factor that ties a lot of these companies together is that they're actually hardware companies. So they're either directly manufacturing and selling electronics, they're cloud companies which rent hardware essentially, or they're companies like Microsoft, which don't directly sell hardware, but make a lot of money when hardware is sold because they license software. So what is their incentive? And their incentive, I would argue, is that they're facilitating applications development for their platform. So they sell a piece of hardware that is capable of an extremely broad range of use cases. I mean, you're talking about a personal computer. We still haven't enumerated all of the possible things you can do with a computer, right? And so one single hardware company is not going to be able to fulfill all of the software demands that could possibly exist for that piece of equipment. And so what the premise then of open software is for these companies, why do they support it, is to facilitate application development on their platform. And they are incentivized to basically put information out there and put software out there that other people can use as sort of easily as possible. Next slide. So how exactly do they do that? And how does it work in those cases? So they want to be able to focus their resources on like the sort of core business process of creating and manufacturing the hardware, and then kind of separating concerns and leaving the actual much of the applications development to the larger open source ecosystem. And again, that's why NVIDIA, which came up a lot in Dieter Fox's talk, NVIDIA has these collaborations with labs and with outside partners. And it's not as if they sold a bunch of GPUs to Dieter that sort of made that collaboration worthwhile, or that they made a lot of money through consulting, but they're actually facilitating applications development on their platform that will enable them to, down the line, sell tons of GPUs in the future. I guess another way I can put it is, what if only Apple could make iPhone applications? Or what if they let other people make applications, but they just didn't have tools out there that made it easy to make those applications? And so if you look into the sort of GitHub pages for these organizations, so Apple's GitHub page or Microsoft's GitHub page, they host hundreds or sometimes even thousands of repositories that are really, really good for the most part. They put hundreds of people onto these projects of producing software that they give away for free. And all of this ties into their core business process because the ecosystem of applications for this software contributes to the value of what they're fundamentally selling. Next slide, please. So now we can kind of pull it back to sort of automation, robotics, these sort of hardware that people in this room might be interested in. How does that, what is the association here? So I guess the question I'll put is, what automation hardware can you think of that supports a super high range of applications that you can't, within a small company or even any size company, enumerate all of the software applications for? And we want to go to the next slide. So that would encompass a handful of different types of robots that are all sort of broadly, I would call Cartesian dispensing robots. So that would be liquid handling robots, which can perform tons of different biological workflows. They're just core assets to really any automated lab. 3D printers, which have essentially similar functionality in terms of how they move around, and then the extrusion module is going to be different. And then bioprinters, which are actually like somewhere in the middle. So they dispense living cells, tissue, and then sort of scaffolding hydrogel that enables the tissue to adhere and survive. And I think one really cool example of this that I'll call out is the Jubilee multi-tool robot. So this is a robot that actually addresses the diverse functionality of what a Cartesian dispensing robot is by having multiple tool modules accessible within the Cartesian frame. And so you can pick up a dispensing module, dispense, drop that, pick up an extrusion module, and then work with that. And so this is actually just an open source, essentially hobbyist project. There's not like a company associated with this, but as far as I know. But it's, I think, incredibly powerful and inspiring in that they've addressed all of these different functionalities. Next slide, please. So within the field of Cartesian dispensing or liquid handling robots, there's a couple extremely, I would argue, high value applications that are going to grow a lot and have grown significantly in the past several years and will continue to grow. So this is basically tissue engineering and cell therapy that rely extensively on these processes. And automation will, of course, help facilitate scale, testing a wider range of experimental parameters. And so what are the different things you can do with bioprinting, tissue engineering? What is the actual like economic interest there? So one of the main applications of this is regenerative medicine. So you're printing stem cells into patterned tissue, and you can actually then introduce these to a patient to heal some injury, wound, or other medical problem with that patient. Another application is just basic cell biology. So you're printing out a large number of experimental materials, and then you can test then a wide range of parameters on those, and that can be just drug screening. So you're printing out living tissue and testing a range of different drug combinations. And the range of combinations here can be extremely high because you're looking at a dose-dependent response. And so, and also combinations of different drugs, combinations of different tissues, this kind of thing. And also, this sort of also leads into organoid models. So not just a single type of tissue, but a patterned tissue that at the cellular level resembles the patterns you'll find in living tissue. And so these are just a number of the applications for liquid handling robots and bioprinting that are having increasing impact in the fields of biomedicine. Next slide, please. So this is one example that I really like of just one application of this field is automated microfluidic cell culture of stem cell derived dopaminergic neurons. So basically a robot dispensed stem cells into a microfluidic structure, and they were able to differentiate these into neurons, and then not just differentiate them, but also have integrated microscopy, temperature control, because you need to really precisely control the temperature of this system, and basically test a really wide range of parameters. They have really beautiful microscopy images of the neurons in like firing events based on calcium fluorescence microscopy. And if you want to go to the next slide, what I think is really cool about this robot is it's a Festo robot. So it's actually a Festo gantry, and I think multiple other components are Festo derived. And so the question is, if your company built this robot, how are you enabling your customers to build more robots like this? I mean, it's an incredibly powerful application, and I think there is a challenge or a question of basically information sharing of how do you provide people the tools to not just rely on the manufacturer to sort of customize and do all the design themselves, but what are you giving in terms of public information that can let people essentially empower people to produce this themselves, and run a range of software and mechanical device integrations. We can go to the next slide. So what I would say is that there's a number of sort of key discrete deliverables for facilitating an open source ecosystem of applications development for a high value hardware product like what we just saw, like a liquid handling robot, like a bioprinter. And so you want to provide standardized interfaces for hardware to enable abstraction over low-level details. And basically, that will enable users to more easily configure the specific setup they have based on interfaces that they can expect and predict to work in a certain way. And that's going to be helpful for all the integrations we saw in the previous slide, where there was like 10 different devices integrated. Now, if you're integrating all of those from the ground up based on non-standardized interfaces, that's going to be a real headache. If you have a GitHub that offers you something that interfaces that can work essentially the same regardless of minute differences in configuration or like low-level hardware, that's going to make things a lot easier for customers. Another key deliverable is facilitating knowledge sharing within the community. So you can imagine that there might not be one customer that has that kind of robot, but 3 or 4, and they might have slightly different configurations or just not be connected to each other in a certain way. But they've all sort of found key or valuable use cases or even problems that have come up that to enable them to more effectively use that configuration, they are going to have to independently address all of the potential problems that can come up. And without access to a sort of information sharing ecosystem, that can be extremely challenging, because you might imagine that a system that integrates hardware, software, electronics, and stem cells is going to be super complicated, and there's going to be a lot of things that can go wrong. And so sharing information about all of those things between incentivized customers is going to be super important to ensuring the success of their workflows. The last thing that I think is incredibly valuable is just simplifying distribution and deployment of software. So it's not really just a question of you have a sort of static code base and users can sort of pull from that and use how they want, but you may be incentivized to host a platform for sharing those resources and also making it as easy as possible for users to port configurations from one system to another based on, again, these standardized interfaces. And so whether somebody's running a Windows computer, a Linux computer, they don't want to have to worry about that. And whatever you can do to sort of address the potential problems that can come up with different configurations will go a long way to ensuring the portability of designs rather than them having to work through the small details every single time a new customer tries to create a complicated integration like we just saw. I think that's it. If you want to go to the next slide, just have these acknowledgements. So I want to thank the PyLab Robot team, Rick Farango, Wilson Ho, and Shreya Chaudhary. This is all my team at MIT. I want to thank my lab overall, especially Danny Grennan and Corey, and Kevin Esfeld, my PI. And then I want to thank everybody on the labautomation.io forum and all the open source contributors who have contributed to the GitHub repos that I host. Thanks so much.